and welcome. You're listening to Set Me Productions. My name is Rana. Maybe it happened all at once. Maybe a wake-up call, something startling. Maybe half your state burned down and you don't want to be part of the other half when it goes. Maybe a mass shooting happened just once too frequently or just happened a little too close to home. Maybe you needed something and couldn't get it, and realized that didn't need to be the reality. Maybe it was a bunch of smaller things, adding up, little by little over the years, a growing sense of unease and discontent. Maybe it was nothing specific you could put your finger on, but maybe you just woke up one day and realized, this just isn't my home anymore. And for some of us, maybe it's more of a, I'm not sure that this ever was. Regardless of how you got there, one day you were living at home, and the next day you had to somewhat seriously consider the question, if I was going to move to another country, what country would I want that to be? That question is a tough one to consider seriously. And there's a lot of factors that make a country unique, and hell, there are a lot of factors that go into making every city and every family in every city unique. So how can we possibly boil down all that makes up a country into just a few digestible metrics that actually accurately represents what daily life would look like there? Because our goal here isn't to turn in some 5th grade report on the 3 largest exports and principal population distribution of whatever nation we've been assigned. It's to grasp, encapsulate, and understand what actual daily life would look like for us if we were to make our new home there. Well, the answer is we can't, not really, but we have to do the best we can with the information available to us. We can't truly know these things without lived experience. The only way to really know a country is to live in it, and the best ways to experience it short of that are a trip through it and speaking with actual residents of that country, which may or may not be readily available to us. And short of that, well, all I can say is that I hope my internet sleuthing is roughly representative of reality. To further compound matters, I only care about some things, and I'm only interested in some countries. You may be interested in many countries that I am not. I'm almost certainly interested in metrics that you are not, and conversely, not interested in some metrics that you are. For instance, I am a tech guy with a background in networking and desktop support. As long as a language barrier isn't too much of a barrier, those are skills that, as far as I know, are needed in pretty much any developed nation we would consider moving to in the first place. These skills could potentially see me in good employment wherever I go, and I wouldn't be very interested in a place where those skills would be of little value unless something of equal or greater value replaced them, which is entirely possible. For all I know, I'm going to strike gold making videos and we'll be able to do it from literally anywhere. So how do we evaluate a country? What do we care about? What factors go into deciding if it's a good place to live or not? Why is Russia a bad place to live, but the Netherlands a good place to live? Perhaps a better question to ask is, if we're dissatisfied with where we currently are, is that fair? Is there somewhere significantly better? How much of that is simply, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence wistful thinking that will, rightfully or wrongfully, never be acted upon? These are in no particular order at the moment, and certainly not in order of importance. When considering what could constitute a good home to you, what would you consider? Which of these would you not consider? I honestly want to know. Please, tell me below in the comments. What have I gotten right, and what have I gotten wrong here? The first is, of course, general culture and lifestyle, which comes with a massive caveat. Actually, it's mostly caveat. The first thing to keep in mind is that lifestyle varies dramatically across region and even within regions. You're about as likely to see a truck with a Trump sticker on it in Portland, Oregon, as you are to see a Prius with a Bernie sticker. Personally, I've only tried the latter, but I believe you can be just as miserable in a tropical paradise as you can be in a soggy, gray, windswept, and rain-soaked, muddy quagmire. For a nation as large and diverse as the United States of America, that means a lot more than it does in a much smaller place, like, for example, again, the Netherlands. There's simply room and population for a much greater diversity of opinion and lifestyle when you're sprawled across a continent and 6 time zones. The culture of Florida has little to do with the culture of New York City, which likewise has little to do with Alaska, which has precious little in common with Los Angeles or Hawaii, neither of which much resemble Texas. Still, I firmly believe there's a massive potential variance in lifestyle even in tiny places, and that this largely boils down to the individual and what they're interested in and who they meet. In some ways, that makes it easier to classify smaller nations and regions, but there's no easy way to boil down a people group and not end up with a useless stereotype anyway. I'll do my best to guard against that through this series, but I'm going to ask for your help in that right here and now. When or if you see that, call it out. So obviously, the general culture matters a great deal and cannot be overstated, yet I've never lived anywhere that could be described with any singular general cultural identity. Everywhere there are humans, there is a breadth and diversity of culture and opinion that brings far more than it costs and ought to be celebrated. The second factor to keep in mind is geography, and necessarily climate change. Things are changing dramatically and rapidly. What was temperate and mild in yesteryear is growing harsh and violent and increasingly intense in every way. What's warm gets warmer, what's dry gets drier, what's wet gets wetter, and what's stormy gets semi-apocalyptic. Once in a century, storms and weather events happen every decade instead. We've all been here for it, I don't need to belabor this point further. The globe is on fire, and we all want to know where the safe place to ride it out is going to be. This is also going to include things like arable, fertile land and the infrastructure surrounding it to enable food security, not to mention the fresh water necessary to take advantage of it, general natural resources and therefore energy generation, renewable or not, though obviously preferably renewable, will also fall under this category. As we've recently seen, the general strategy of energy interdependence is no guarantee of peace, so some weight ought to be placed on energy independence one way or the other here. The third factor I want to point to is entirely social. Legal factors. How many people are incarcerated per capita? How are legal issues dealt with? What's the legal system look like, and what sort of protections are there for someone like us? In Japan, for example, 99% of those arrested are found guilty. There are next to no protections for those accused of a crime and caught up in the legal system. Rightly or wrongly, this puts me just some bad luck and misunderstanding away from being in a very, very bad position in Japan, and that concerns me greatly. The fourth factor to consider is the future, which I want to split into two major parts. First, internal pressures that the nation is facing, and second, external pressures that the nation is facing. Sweden is facing a great deal of internal turmoil regarding their immigration policy and situation, which ought to be considered soberly and clearly, as well as facing a very different set of pressures as they navigate the potential joining of NATO and the threats from Russia. Their neighbor Finland shares a very long border with a very belligerent and increasingly aggressive Russia, and even if everything else was perfect, would we want to be that close to a potential World War III hotspot? How likely is it to actually come to that? There's very little point in moving to a place right before it collapses into a war zone. The fifth factor to consider is how welcoming they would be to us, how easy it would be to move there, to integrate into society, to obtain legal status, a job, a place to live, etc. Widespread English would obviously be helpful there to begin with, but I'm not scared to learn another language, particularly a European one, since they're more closely related to English in the first place and I'd have a head start. The next several are predictable. Sixth is healthcare. I want it to exist and actually be accessible. It doesn't need to be the absolute best in the world. I can't access the best in the world as it stands. Most developed nations on the planet have this figured out, but each has solved it in a different way, and each system comes with its own complications, its own pros and cons. Seventh is education. I feel strongly that education is the foundation of a just and equitable society, and that a just and equitable society is, or ought to be, the end goal of all of our efforts. We may have roughly 7.5 billion different definitions of what a just and equitable society looks like, but providing a solid education to the entire population is a vital step towards it. Let's do it. Eighth is a social safety net of some sort, anyway, including childcare and elder care. Life happens in the best of ways and in the worst of ways. Sometimes there was nothing you could do, win or lose, and you need a helping hand. I firmly believe that helping hand should be there for you, and that society is strengthened when we help each other out. Things like unemployment insurance to help cover times between jobs help keep us all afloat and keep all of society moving instead of grinding to a halt. Things like parental leave or childcare can be the difference between the ability to have a family or not, and elder care is often the difference between aging gracefully or rather horribly. I, for one, would rather grow into my so-called golden years in comfort, security, and safety instead of being left to fend for myself and rely on the private charities that may or may not exist. Rugged individuality is fantastic, but should have gone out the window with your first dirty diaper. It'll serve you quite poorly on your last. Ninth is transportation. In the United States, you need a car to do almost anything. Even very short trips require a car. It's not that we're fat and lazy, or at least not just that. It's that much of the country has been bulldozed and built up around the car, and has been designed in a way that is just unwalkable and actively hostile to pedestrians. Please, watch the excellent Not Just Bikes and City Beautiful channels for more on that. Buses, trains, and other forms of mass transit are seen as second class at best. I live right beside a supermarket, literally within a stone's throw, and I still have to make at least one unprotected traffic crossing per trip. As long as you have both a car and the money required to maintain and continue using that car, that's more or less fine. Maybe not preferable, but fine. We need an equivalent wherever we go that's a realistic option. 10th, and perhaps most indefinable of all of these, is general freedom. The ability to do what you want, when you want, how you want. Maybe starting a computer support business out of your living room, maybe turning your front yard into a vegetable garden, maybe simply taking a drive to a neighboring region. There will always be a balance sought between individual liberty and the sacrifices we make for greater social cohesion, and there is no one right answer here, no one perfect place where things are perfectly free or perfectly unfree. As circumstances change, the amount of freedom desired changes as well. That social safety net I mentioned above relies on us relying on each other, which inherently means giving up a touch of that personal liberty. But so does working together to hunt larger game. Giving up personal liberty to enable greater rewards than we could achieve on our own is literally the foundation of civilization, and I'm not going to pretend that this is a black and white, all or nothing, freedom or tyranny kind of thing. It's simply not. The people of the UK are free people, as are the people of New Zealand, as are the people of the US. Each has different restrictions placed upon them by their government and are less free in different ways. Obviously, I wish to live where I will be free, but what that means will be open to interpretation. I wish to be free to do what I want, but if the last 30-some years are any indication, what I want will certainly change. Lastly, the 11th factor I wish to grade countries on in terms of livability is the other, the special factor that sets them apart, the thing that makes them unique. Maybe it's their history, or something about their culture, or something that makes up for a deficiency in some other area. I'm just going to call it other for now. I'm honestly unsure. At the end of the day, America will need evaluated along the same lines as every other nation, and decisions will need made based on what's best for you in your specific situation. I can't possibly know what factors matter most to you in your life or how heavily to weigh them for you. Those are matters only you can know. All I can do is promise to give the most honest look at this that I can, given the information that's currently available to me and my admittedly limited, biased perspective, and ask that you help me broaden my horizons and increase that perspective to include what I've never considered before. So, now what? Well, we have a starting point. Now we have 11 metrics of livability that we can use to compare and contrast countries and get an idea of where ideal places to live are going to be. Now we can take these metrics and actually apply them, which is really what this is supposed to be all about. This video is only the beginning. From here out, I intend to explore the planet, country by country and region by region if it makes more sense, to hopefully get some actual data-driven opinions and to share them here. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I can't wait to see where it takes us.